Everyone, this is Travis McGrath, the Director of Client Experience here at Exago, and I'm going to be presenting today's Technical Support Lab. As we begin, like always, I want to make sure everyone can hear me all right and see my screen. So everyone is on mute, but if you can give a yes, a hello, a how are you? In the right-hand panel, I already see a couple from some regular Support Lab attendees, so that's great. One of my colleagues, Tom, insisted that folks don't ask a lot of questions during technical sessions. So I want to encourage everyone at any point today, if you have questions, if you want to see something again, if you want to have a little more detail on something, please use that panel on the bottom right to ask questions as we go along. Tom and some others will be in there answering questions. And of course, I'll bring up good questions for the group as well. Awesome. So with that, we're actually going to cover a topic that we've talked about once before. In fact, we're celebrating 4 years of doing these monthly labs with this lab here. And so we're throwing back to one of our original technical topics, which is our multi-data models, how you have some additional features when you're laying out your data objects and your joins. We're going to cover this in its entirety on its own. And then we're going to add one feature that's not very new, but it's new relative to the old lab. So we wanted to give this a refresh and then talk about a feature that's been added since the last time we covered this topic. Awesome. So with that, let's dive right in. So here, the first thing we're going to do, we're going to talk about multi-data models. What are they? How do they work? Why would you use them? And then we're going to talk about data object cloning. That's that newish feature that was added since the last time we recorded this topic. We're going to keep it pretty simple though, just those two topics, not much else. So with that, multiple data models. So first of all, what are they? What's their purpose? So multiple data models is a feature when you're defining the data objects and joins that a user is going to have access to, where two objects can be related in different ways. That is to say, they could have different join paths. Maybe they join directly to each other using different columns that need to be matched, or maybe in one case they join directly to another, and then in another, in your second case or your other cases, they have joins that involve going through a different object. This is a little hard to talk about in the abstract because we're using a lot of generic terms like object and cases. So what we're going to do is use an example. So for all of our examples today, we're going to talk about a data model for a university where we have professors, students, and classes. We like this example because, basically everyone has gone to some sort of schooling, and so this example of having teachers and students is pretty easy to translate, to and to understand. So in our example, we're going to have two ways professors can relate to students. Professors can be students' direct advisors, so not necessarily teaching them a class, but helping them choose their classes, make sure they're on the right track, giving them counseling and advice as they need it, as they move through this university. And then of course the other thing professors can do is they can teach a class in which the student is enrolled. So that's the intuitive understanding, but of course we have to make that into a database. So what we're going to do is look at a RDE, a relationship entity diagram here. And so we're going to have a professors table, a students table, a classes table, and because students can take many classes and classes each have many students, we're going to have sort of this middle table. So this is a really normalized database here where the students have a join to enrollment, and then from enrollment, it tells you which student is enrolled in which class. So that's sort of a many-to-many relationship using this enrollment table. And of course, the professors have a join to be teaching the class. And as we mentioned, professors can advise students, right? And so already here you can see the professor can advise students, or a professor can teach a class and the class can have enrollment, and the enrollment is based on students, right? So you have two different paths to get from professors to students. So how do we do this in Exago? Well, so the first thing we're going to do is just define all the data objects as you normally would, and we can define all these joins. Right, so we're going to define all the data objects, and we're going to add the joins. And if we wanted we could add some weights to these joins. The weights, as we've talked about in past labs, would let you as the admin determine which of those paths to take if we don't specify. But we want to allow the user to take advantage of either of those paths and be really intentional in what they're doing, not just fall back on the automatic weights. So we don't want to use weights here. What we're going to do is create categories. The term category is a little overloaded, so we have it in air quotes here. And these categories, we don't actually have them built into the admin console. It's such a small feature. We're just going to manually do this in the XML. So I'm going to show an example of this in just a minute. But once we have these categories in the XML, we can then tell the data objects and joins to respect the categories. So that's a little confusing. So let's look at this in practical terms. So we're going to jump over to an admin console. And in here, I have our data objects. So our data source, we have our Exago University database. We have our objects, and our objects are nicely split out by sources. So I can easily see we have our classes, professors, and students. So I'm going to start just with a couple of these. Defining our data objects, very simple. We just choose the table or view from our database, give it an alias, a unique key, an ID, some column metadata. But really importantly is this folder. In here, we're calling it a folder. In the XML, we're going to call this a category. And in this case, the folder is where the object is going to reside in the interface. But what's neat about this is we're actually defining two here. So it's a little hard to see, but just because of the size, I can zoom in a little bit there. But you can see that there's a comma, and we're actually defining two folders. And what we're going to do is tell Exago when this object is then going to appear in both of those folders, and when the user chooses the data object from a particular folder, that's going to indicate which join to use. So we've got our data objects defined. We've said that they should be in these two different folders. And then we've also got all of our joins defined. You're just gonna have to trust me here. All the joins that we need are gonna be defined here. And then we're not quite done because we still need to tell the joins which folders that they should follow as well. So we're going to go over to our XML file, and all that entails is going to the installation of Exago, finding the corresponding config file. That's just going to be, in my case, webreports.xml. I've collapsed everything here just to make it easy to read, but we have our general settings, our data sources. Data objects in XML are called entities. So in here we'll have our, professors, students, all the entities we set up. We don't need to change these at all. But what we're going to do is two things. If I scroll down here to start, in the XML, we're going to add what's called a category object. So this is more formally defining those folders that we set on the data objects. And we're going to give that two properties. One is an ID. This is going to match the values we added up above in the data object. And then one is a category name. And this is actually what's going to display to a user. So if you are grouping things in grouping data objects in a folder, you can actually have those folders be given an ID, and then you can change those category names dynamically. So if you wanted to through the API, you could even change these. But what we're going to do is set up a sort of nice looking folder, Exago University, and we're using the slash to indicate that there should be a subfolder. So we're going to call the first one student model and the second one advisor model. So this is a way to indicate to the user, hey, this is which of those models of data you're using. And then the last piece here is that for each of the joins, so in this case, I have a join from student to enrollment, I'm going to add this category tag and use that ID to indicate this join should only occur if you choose the data object from that particular folder, or in this case, category, right? We can use those interchangeably. And in doing so, this join is going to know that it's part of the student model relation, that is to say, from students to enrollment to classes to professors. And I can do that again here. So in this case, professors and students, well, that's the direct relationship, that advisor relationship. So I'm going to add a category to this join to say that's part of the professor model. In fact, that's the only real join in the professor model. And then we can continue on like that. So here you have, your join from professors to classes, that's part of the student model, and so on and so forth. So for each of these joins, we can add our category tag saying which category it should belong in. If I come back to our Exago interface, now that I've had that, I've hit save, it's all ready to go. I'll just give this a quick refresh so that it's applied. And then if I come into any of our designers, but I'm going to jump to the Express view, I'll see my Exago University folder. Those slashes indicate that I should have subfolders. So I'll see that I have my advisors and student models. And now I'll see these two objects in both models because I told those two objects that they should appear in both subfolders. But if I choose students from this folder, it'll know that the student-professor relationship is an advisor. If I choose students from down here, it'll know that students moves to enrollment, moves to classes, etc. So in this way, we can set up multiple models between the same two data objects. So let me go back to our presentation. So we added our data objects, added the admin joins in the admin console. In the XML, manually created those categories, and then we set the joins and data objects to live or respect which category they're coming from. So the XML, very easy, is just category with a name and ID. The category on the data objects themselves, we're setting here, very simple. We're using that comma if an object should reside in more than one. And then for the join, same thing. We're just setting which category that join should reside in here. So I want to pause there, see if there are any questions on the multi-data model feature, how that worked, if there's any question whatsoever. Awesome, not seeing any questions, so we're going to keep forging forward here. So the second feature that I want to talk about is clones. So this is a slightly different way of accomplishing something that's pretty similar. So first of all, cloning data objects. So what we're going to do is in our admin console, if we have a data object, we have the ability to copy as a reference an existing data object. What that means is the clone is going to inherit all the base attributes, that is to say the alias, the base attributes, so the column metadata, the various properties on the data object, except the alias, the ID, and then optionally the description and the folder. So you might say, okay, I can copy as a reference this data object. Why would I want to do that? Well, so this is commonly used, or the intent of this feature is for joining an object to another object in several different ways. You might say, hey, that sounds a lot like what you just described with multi-data models. If you immediately thought that, don't worry, we're going to circle back to that in just a second. But to give folks an example, right, you might have on a single report the need to show professors relating to students in multiple ways, right? And so an easy example of that would be if you wanted to show a report of students, the classes they attend, which professors are teaching the classes that they're enrolled in, but for each student, you also want to show who their advisor is, right? That might be a breakdown by student of their upcoming semester, and that would involve both showing the professors that they have for classes and the professor who's their advisor. Right, so we're going to list the students' enrollment in classes and see their advisor for each student. And in this case, we could group by the instructor for the class. You could also group by the student, right? So your requirements there sort of vary. And this is what that's going to look like from a modeling perspective, is that you're going to have the student and their advisor, that direct relationship we talked about before. but then the student's also going to enroll in a class. So they're going to have enrollment to a class, and you're going to see which professors are teaching the class they're enrolled in. So this is going to present a problem that cloning can solve, where you're going to want to use the same object, the same underlying base table, 2 times on a single report. And so how we handle this is we can create the data object in the admin console, all the data objects we need, and then we can clone the professor object as either a university advisor or call it a department advisor, right? So we can create a clone of the professor's object, and then we can add additional joins using that clone in the admin console, right? And so here, what I'm going to do is jump over to the admin console. And this is actually a really easy feature to use. So I have those data objects defined already from our multi-data model example. And if I right click on professors, in this case, that's the object we want to clone, I notice in addition to add and edit, I have this clone capability. So that brings me over to my tab here. And this allows me to create a new clone of the database table, the object that I've already defined. And I could give this advisors. I give this a alias and an ID. And if I want to, it's going to inherit everything except for alias and ID. If I want to, I can also have it inherit the same folders and the same description. Or I could give it a different set of folders and description. So I could say, no, I want this to exist, in a different data object folder in the UI. I want it to use a different, data model. So these 2 things can be tied together. And the same thing, I want to give it a different description. Maybe I want to make sure that there's a tooltip, explaining what advisors is and how it's supposed to be used, right? So I can give it a different description. And then once I have a clone, so if I hit OK here, I'm not going to because I want to keep that multi-data model set up as I had it. But once I have a clone, it'll appear just like other data objects, and I'll be able to add a join to follow that relationship diagram we saw before. Okay, so you might say, those 2 things sound really similar. When do I use one? When do I use the other? So we wanted to break that down. So both these features have in common that they're a way to allow multiple joins between 2 objects. And you can have different join paths based on your use case, right? And that's why they seem really similar. Specifically, the multi-data models solution, that feature, is best when you have different relationships on different reports. So for a particular report, you're going to follow one relationship between 2 objects. For a different report, you're going to follow a different relationship between those 2 objects. The clones feature is most useful when you need to have the same object on a report related to something differently. So in this case, that professor's object is going to appear on the same report more than once, but in this case, once as the professor teaching the class and once as the student advisor, right? So that's really a key distinction in why you might use one versus the other. Awesome. Just want to pause there. Are there any questions on data object clones? Okay. I don't see any questions coming in, so I'll just say that's really the end of the content. So we will wait just a little bit here for additional questions. But with that, we can keep this lab pretty brief. Do want to mention, as we close out the year, our upcoming lab in December is going to cover 3D charts and other types of charts. It's going to be given by my colleague Emma. I'm really excited to see it myself. It even includes some new charts that have been added more recently. So we're going to be talking about different chart types, and that should be pretty cool. Going into next year, we have a few ideas for topics, but we really want to know what you want to hear, whether those are front-end report design or more technical topics, extensibility examples, which of these labs have you liked, which haven't you liked. So at the end of the session today, as you leave, you're going to be prompted to fill out a survey. If you would, even if all you do in the survey is say, hey, I'd love to hear this topic, or could you answer this question? We really want to make sure that these labs are driven by what you guys want to see. So we've got some ideas for next year, but we'd love to hear your opinion on what we should do after that. Oh, okay, this is a great couple of questions have come in. Okay. Two great questions came in. So one question said, when a clone is used, are underlying properties copied or shared? So the underlying properties are shared, except for the ones listed before. So the column metadata, those things are going to be, the clone is going to follow those same properties for the clone is going to follow the same properties that it inherited previously, except for the alias, the ID, the description, and the folders that it resides in. A second question came in and said, what's the advantage of joining in Exago versus on a database? So I've outlined sort of defining these joins in Exago in the admin console as a configuration setting, but I'll say that wherever possible, Exago pushes joins to the database. So in the examples I've shown here, none of the joins are being done in memory by Exago. They're always being done on the database. It's just about defining them so Exago understands the relationship and can present them to the end user and create the right syntax for the database itself. So I did show the editor very briefly, but let me pop back over there. So in the example, the question was, can you show us how this looks in the Exago editor? So in this case, I'm in an Express view, but the advanced wizard, the advanced report designer are going to look the same in that because we've set up these multiple data models as these subfolders, this is what it'll look like here. So we'll have our advisors and students. I didn't finish adding the clone, but if I did, I could, similar to how we see here, I could add another subfolder or an entire separate folder that defined those data objects as I needed, and it would appear just like any other to the user. Okay, great. So with that, I'll give it just another minute for any final questions. But if you don't have any questions, again, we'd love to hear what topics you want us to cover going into the new year. And thank you very much for attending today, and happy reporting.